Welcome to episode 125 of the Reptile Gumbo podcast.
Wow, 125.
125.
You're creeping on up there, man.
You keep saying
you're
that.
creeping, all right.
Yeah. My dad's still in town, so he's here. We brought him in for comic relief.
Did he sit in for me last week?
Yeah.
He did. He was in here last week.
Because
Yeah.
I did not watch last week's podcast.
Yes,
Unfortunately.
That's okay.
I'm a little bit hurt.
I don't think I've watched any since I've been on it or listened to because there's no point.
It was pretty funny. We told lots of James stories. It was great.
I bet that was great.
There was a lot of many stories. Yeah. How I got into reptiles and how we lost reptiles. Look, see, Anal Side Exotics is here.
Oh, sweet Jesus.
They're here last week. What?
Okay, go. Come on.
Anyways, what are you doing over there?
Annoying
He
me.
wasn't moving it.
All right.
Make my presence known.
Let's go ahead and get through our sponsors and do our intro because I want to get to our guests because I'm excited. So it's Katie.
All right, our first sponsor is Lone Star Reptile Racks.
Who?
If you are looking for a high quality PVC rack, look no further than Lone Star Reptile Racks. They offer a variety of sizes for all types of snakes, geckos, rats, and more. You can even order something custom. Shipping is available, or you can plan to pick up at a Herps Reptile show near you. Visit lsreptileracks.com to reach out to Lone Star Reptile Racks and place your order today.
Yeah. And you had a decent weekend this weekend in Slidell.
Yeah, Canal Side Exotics. Don't worry, I feel the same way about the .com shit. James always does. Yeah, it was Slidell was busy.
I saw pictures. There were a lot of people there.
It was good to see a busy show and people buying because those two haven't seemed to have been a combination for a while.
That's true. After that last Conroe, that was rough. That was the slowest Conroe I've ever seen. But like I said before, as gas prices drop, you're going to see more, and it has. Yep. I mean, y'all paid the other day like
I paid $350.
No, $330.
It was $335.
It's pretty good.
$335.
It's pretty bad that we're excited about that.
It was on the way to Galveston.
I don't know if you saw my post last week when I shared from when we were in Colorado 2 years ago at a show, and it was $2.50 a gallon, and I was like, "This is some BS." And if I'd only known,
beg for $2.50 a gallon.
Yeah,
but like I said,
how quickly we become programmed.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I said if it gets $3.50 and below, you're going to see it pick up.
I apologize.
Come on,
my God,
come on, professional. Be professional.
Just for the record, it wasn't the old guy who forgot to put his phone on silent.
But our buddy John Grant had a good weekend. I was talking to him. He had a great weekend, and I was very happy there.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I saw a lot of people. Why can't my brain just went blank? Douglas Ray White said he had a good weekend.
Yeah, they had a good weekend. Terry. So
Terry was that?
Said his wife had a good weekend.
Really?
Yeah, I think she sold some pretty good.
Yeah, they normally do Slidell.
Yeah,
she sold some pretty good crested geckos.
I hate that I don't see all them.
Who else? Margie and Flavius were right across from us. They seem to have done well.
That's good. It was time for a good show for everybody, especially all the folks that are like you it's their career. Like for me, it's not a career thing for me. So it's just a hobby. But those that need to be able to pay rent, it's kind of important. They sell some stuff.
Yeah, I wish rent was the only thing I had to pay.
So speaking of herp shows, we got some upcoming ones. This weekend, July 30th and 31st, is the Oklahoma City show that we are not going to be at. But our buddy John Grant, go visit Grant Family Exotics, buy tons of stuff from them. They will be there. Then August 13th and 14th, Corpus Christi, Texas. We will be there. We will actually be recording. You can come buy a rack and a cage from Robert.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. You covered that already.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Racks and cages from Robert at Corpus. And we will be recording there as well. Come by, see us, say hi. We're going to pull some of the vendors that we only tend to get. Corpus is like the most southern show we have. So there's some vendors there that we don't tend to get at the shows up here.
Yeah.
So we're going to hit them up for some interviews. And then August 20th and 21st, the next weekend is Bryan College Station. We're also going to record at that show. So we'll have a whole lot of live show interviews coming soon. I know some people told me they really like those. And I enjoy doing this too.
Yeah, I do too.
I get to talk to some people that I never really talked to.
It gets a little hectic because I have to.
Timing is hard.
But it's going to be rough at Corpus because I'm going to be the only vendor there with cages and racks.
Yes.
So I'm hoping that I'm going to be super busy the whole time. Or maybe I'll just sell out like halfway through the day Saturday. And then I'll have plenty of time to record.
Tons of time.
Yeah.
August 27th, 28th is the Austin, Texas show. We will not be there, but you'll be there, I'm sure. Austin, Texas.
Oh, yeah.
Then there's September 10th and 11th. That is Conroe. We will be there. September 17th and 18th, which is New Orleans. And then October 15th and 16th is Waco. And then back to Lafayette, November 5th and 6th. Are we going to the show? I want to go to that show. I want some boudin.
The Lafayette show?
Yeah.
We'll have to check the calendar.
I have no animals to sell.
We'll see.
But I want some boudin and food. So, okay. Other sponsors. Oh, Wiregrass Exotics. If you are in Georgia, Florida, or Alabama, go by and visit our friends over at Wiregrass Exotics in Ozark, Alabama for all your feeder and reptile needs.
And then Focus Q Habitats are
Focus Cube Habitats. They are in the chat. They made this amazing sign that is above my head. I love this thing.
Says, hey, yo, I'm going to bet that's Ashley.
Probably.
She's really excited about tonight's episode.
Probably.
So am I.
I am.
I love every time.
This is the reason that I own corn snakes. So I'm very
I was
excited.
even, I don't want to say I was surprised, but I was when I told Logan who he had on. He was like, oh, really? He's 12 and
I
he knows who
know.
Kathy is, but he loves corn snakes. So,
Yep.
If you love corn snakes, you got to know who we're talking about. So
let's bring her in.
let's go ahead and bring our guest in. Click the button here. And it is Kathy Love. And if you don't know who Kathy Love is at this point, then stop this podcast and go just Google it. Come on. How's it going, Kathy?
Oh, pretty good.
I even broke out my two Kathy Love corn snake books that I have.
You're such a dork.
I didn't realize one of them was actually signed by her. And then this one was apparently a present to you because I signed it.
Yeah, I think you gave it to me when we started dating because I wasn't afraid of corn snakes, but I was afraid of other snakes. And so I think this was your attempt to get me.
You romantic devil.
I know. So I remember when we started dating, they used to have the corn snake calculator. And we'd
You see that, Kathy? You're a matchmaker and didn't even know it.
Well, it sounds like a very appropriate dating gift, or maybe even a wedding gift.
Yeah.
Very good.
Well, the first time I met Kathy, and there's no way you remember this at all, but it was 2003 at a small reptile show in Dothan, Alabama, which is my hometown. And that's where I bought my first snake. And you were there, and I remember Bill was there because he was doing the presentations about Madagascar, about his trips to Madagascar.
Yeah,
That's right. I remember that.
yeah, he
Yeah.
did for a very long time.
Yeah, it was fun. That was there, and then I didn't see you again until we went to 2005 when we went to Daytona, and that's the first time you met. And we
And both
Yeah.
of those, I thought he was going to wet his pants. So that's a huge compliment. Yeah.
Yeah, for anybody that's listening, if you are into corn snakes, you can thank Kathy Love and a handful of other people for where we're at now. I mean, I'm gonna try not to ask you all the tons of questions about how you got to where you are now, just because you've been on like a million podcasts, and I think I could quote the story. A lot of it is the cool, like, you used to be a traveling reptile exhibit, right?
Yes, back in the 70s, we had the Living Jungle. I had a partner, and we traveled all throughout the United States for a few years, must be about 3 years or something like that. And towards the end of the time I was together with my partner, my future husband, Bill Love, came to work for us and did that with us for a while too. It was a real eye-opener for somebody back then when there was no internet and phone calls were expensive, to be able to travel like that and meet some of the pioneers of the day. It was something that you wouldn't be able to do unless you were independently wealthy.
Yeah, and it's got to be weird looking at the hobby from then to now, because then it was we're still kind of a fringe thing, but then it was a very fringe thing to be into reptiles, and it wasn't all over social media when there wasn't social media, but it wasn't all over the place. You didn't see it nearly as much. There wasn't families like going to reptile shows and getting their first family reptile.
That's very true. Back in the late 60s, when I got my first pet snakes, and then into the 70s, it was pretty much just a few men, very few women, who were really into reptiles, and they were into it in a different way than a lot of the masses of people are today. Usually the people who were into it were really heavily into the local herp society, because that was a good way to get information and meet other people. And they were usually into the natural history, whereas a lot of the mainstream pet keepers today are more into them like you might be a cat or a dog, and the natural history of the animal isn't that important to the pet keepers today.
So I hate to do this because the audio was great, like earlier before we sent her off, and then we
That's
brought her
why
back.
I actually just texted somebody to ask if they could hear it on their side.
Yeah,
Canal side.
said it.
Oh,
It's
okay.
breaking up.
Is there any way that you can exit out and come back, Kathy, and then we'll see if it fixes the audio?
Okay, I'll try. I'm not much of
I
a
know.
computer person. Here it says leave.
There we go. See if she comes back and see if it works. Yeah, I hate that because I don't want people to miss what she's saying, because she's full of amazing stories.
Because what she just said was a really good point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
about how so many of these keepers don't know anything about where these animals came from. They just know that, oh, look, we can go to a reptile show and buy, there's thousands of snakes there, but they don't realize that just maybe 30 years ago,
Oh yeah.
there was like one morpho ball python, and that was the normal, unless you wanted to spend 50 grand on an albino.
Well,
And yeah,
and they don't know the people, which is what gets me. Like
mhm.
Kathy Love is if you're a reptile hobby person, you need to learn something like Kathy Love, Tracy Barker, the Barkers in general. They're important names to know. So hopefully her phone lets her get back in. But anyways, so
Well, even to Robert's point, even when you got into it, I mean, I remember when we were just amazed at a piebald ball python.
oh yeah.
Not for A, the price, but B, that was possible and that they were there. There she is.
All right, let's try this again. Let's see. How's it going?
Is it working now?
Oh, it's so much better.
Beautiful. Perfect.
I got in trouble. Darren Watson yelled at me for kicking Kathy Love out of the chat. I'm so sorry.
I wasn't sure if I get back in again.
It is great now.
I know. I hate when we had you on right before we started. Our daughter is doing a gap course for math for her classes next year at junior high. So I was downstairs working on algebra. And yeah, it was lovely.
And I missed that.
I didn't miss
you guys
any of
were
it.
hanging out with Kathy Love upstairs.
I didn't miss any of it.
Well,
Oh.
almost anything sounds more fun than doing math.
100%.
Especially algebra.
That must be a snake person thing then, because
No, it's a normal human
I
thing.
like math.
That's an abnormal thing. So you know how like snake people are weird? People that like math are even weirder.
Okay, fine.
But so when did you start keeping as part of the hobby? 'Cause I mean, you were doing the traveling zoo and everything. That's got to be hard to keep a collection when you're other than the traveling collection, but it's got to be hard to really set roots into the hobby if you're moving around a lot.
True, but it was a great start. I got my first couple of pet snakes in about 9th grade, which probably would have been 1966 or 7 or somewhere in there. And through high school, I had some pet snakes. When I was in 11th and 12th grade, I used to go to the lower grades each year and give talks about my snakes and my pet parrot that I had too. I would take them to the grade schools, and the kids just loved it. And that kind of got me started in education and so forth. And then in the early 70s is when I started the traveling reptile exhibit with a partner. Believe it or not, we had Ottoman's vipers breed right in our traveling reptile exhibit. And at that time, back in the early 70s, only 1 or 2 zoos had ever bred them. So that was pretty exciting.
That whole I just can't imagine. I think people are so spoiled now by the amount of information there is on how to keep an animal, just to anything. And then if you think back to when you got into it, there was nothing. I mean, there was very little. And even last week when we were talking, when we first got into reptiles in 2000, even in the 90s, we had the green cage carpet, a ceramic bowl for water, a hot rock. I mean, we thought we were keeping it the right way then. But you go back into the 70s, and I mean, you're learning everything at that point, right?
Oh, it was both exciting and frustrating because on the one hand, everybody back then was a pioneer because not that much was known. I remember being so excited. I think I was in high school to get some of Caulfield's books, and one of the chapters is "So You Want to Own a Boa." That was like the most advanced keeping information out there that I'd ever seen. So I read that chapter over and over and over again.
I love that.
I just
That's so awesome.
it would be so weird for people today. Because I mean, today we get so annoyed when someone comes on a Facebook group and goes, you ask the simple questions of how big does it get? What temperature do I keep it at? How often do I feed? All the stuff that you can find on 5 million websites. Whereas in like the 60s and 70s, you're figuring that out. Because I think people also don't realize how many reptiles died in the early years. Like you talk to like green tree python people, and so many green tree pythons died to get to where we are now. But now someone can go into a regular pet store, buy one, and keep it alive, no problem.
Oh, that's so true. Back in the 70s, when I grew up in Wisconsin and I wanted out of there as soon as I could. So when I was in my early 20s and started this exhibit, my partner lived in San Antonio, Texas, and was the roommate of Joe Laszlo. So Joe Laszlo became a great mentor, and he was one of the first people that bred snakes on purpose rather than accidentally. He had a big Coca-Cola machine in the back of the reptile house, and he used to put them in there. Prior to that, when I had talked to the reptile curator at the Milwaukee Public Zoo, he told me it's going to be really hard to breed reptiles on a regular basis because you've got to keep them, you've got to cool them down. And if you cool them down, they catch a cold and die. So it's going to mostly be just accidental luck. And that was the Milwaukee Zoo back in the 60s.
That's crazy. Yeah. Well, now people can take a ball python and basically breed it in a closet in a shoebox, or corn snakes where you can just take the eggs and put them on a shelf and they'll incubate fine. And like, you don't have to drop temperatures on some things now. It's so weird where we've come from. And I think people underestimate how hard it was.
It was exciting though, because we would travel to all different areas from San Antonio. Some of the first colubrid breeders were out in Arizona and Southern California. We got to meet them in person and see their collections and see in person what they were doing. It was really exciting. But we didn't have all of the T-Rex and the Zoo Med and all those companies that make it easy for us now. So we would go to medical supply houses and get expired catheters and IV bags to drip water for lizards, and everything was an exciting new innovation that we did, which was fun and creative, but it was also frustrating sometimes.
Yeah, you hear some of the stories about like, it's amazing how like MacGyverish the original reptile people were now, because now you just go to the store and you buy everything you need to set up and it comes in a tank and you're ready to go. Whereas before, like you said, you really had to learn. A hardware store became the reptile store for a lot of people to get to build cages from that and everything else.
Oh, it was really something. Even into the 90s when we had started Glades Herp, you still didn't have a lot of this stuff available. Some of these companies were just getting started. We used to go to some of these companies that sell excess scientific equipment. There's a couple of them up in the Chicago area. When we would go to Bob Ashley's show in the 90s, we would get this and that and everything that was not meant to have anything to do with reptiles and make it into something that had to do with reptiles. It was kind of fun.
Darren Watson in our chat asked, how'd you house the animals when you were on the road?
They mostly stayed in the cages that we had built into this travel trailer. I think it was about a 24 or 26 foot travel trailer. And when we bought it, it had already been used as an exhibit trailer. So the cages were basically there already. And they were just, basic boxes with front doors that opened up on hinges. So the animals would stay in those cages pretty much all the time. And when we had a little hiatus in between one show and another show, then we would just have to park it where we could plug it in so they would have heat or air conditioning or that sort of thing.
Kind of going back to how you started, you said that you had some stuff in high school. What did your parents think about that?
Well, I was raised by a single father, and he had an interesting take on it. Back then, it was really weird for anybody to want to keep a reptile, especially a girl, but he wasn't totally against it. When I first decided that I wanted a pet snake, I think I was in 9th grade, and the high school biology teacher had a boa constrictor he would let kids take home for the summer on a rotating basis. So during that year, I really wanted a snake, and my father said, you just wait until you're like 14 or 15 and you like boys, then you'll forget about all this. And when I finally turned 14, I said, I'm 14 and I still like snakes better than boys. Can I have one?
I love it.
So he finally relented. The first one I ever got was just a garter snake from Wisconsin that I bought at a local pet shop for 50 cents. And I named him Vladimir. I don't know why, but I did.
That's so cool.
I've been for a little while. The first big snake that I ever got, I traded for garter snakes that we were able to catch within walking distance of our house. There was a big hibernaculum that we would see tons of them in April come out. So they would give us 35 cents credit for each garter snake towards this giant bull snake that I wanted that came from western Wisconsin, Spring Green, Wisconsin. So I got my first big snake was an adult bull snake. They were pretty exciting times. I did get to take the teacher's boa constrictor home for the summer too. So it was a really good start.
That's really cool.
Then I learned about the Southeastern Wisconsin Herpetological Society once I was able to start driving. We were in Waukesha and it met in Milwaukee at the Milwaukee Public Museum, and Henderson and Nickerson became mentors for me at the museum. They were both great. There was one other girl in the whole Herp Society, which was pretty big, and I got to hang out with her. But that was my first chance to actually meet people who didn't think reptiles were just weird.
That's the one, and we've talked about before, the one benefit I find of social media. You know, I got into reptiles in the early 2000s. That was kind of before social media, but there was kingsnake.com. And that was the first time you kind of realized that there were other people out there that were as weird as you. And then you start going to shows, you start to meet the other people that are as weird as you. And then social media allowed you to keep up with them on a regular basis. And so that was the one thing is getting to meet people. But back then, I think it would be odd for people to realize, like, when you go to one of these herp meetings, people are bringing animals. Everything's wild caught. No one's really breeding anything, and they're trading wild caught animals. And it's so weird for us now to think about like going out and catching the corn snake and keeping the corn snake. I can just go to the show and buy one for $15 off a table, and it'll be bright yellow with stripes all over it and stuff. But back then, I gotta imagine going to those herp meetings had to be really neat.
Oh, it was. Now that particular one at the museum, I don't remember people bringing live animals, but we did get to go up to the areas where they did have some live reptiles. But mostly it was speakers and things like that, and kind of a scientific bent. But the most important thing was meeting other people who like the same things that you like.
I'm actually part of a group on Facebook. It's the female herpers in the state of Texas. And it's really cool because, I mean, I'm married into the hobby. So I have a few snakes that are mine or that I use in my classroom or things like that. But it's really interesting for me to see just how many other women are really out there. And like I said, I'm married into the hobby, but the two female names that I'm the most well known, it's you and Tracy Barker. And I'm like, if these two women can do so much in what they've done, like my daughter's 11 and she loves going to the shows with us and she loves talking to people, and she'll sit with Robert's son, who's a year older than her, and they'll talk about genetics and snakes and all kinds of stuff. And I love seeing how much it's grown and how so many other women have gotten involved, because it's just cool.
I'll let you do it, James.
So I got to pause because Robert and I both got a message from our buddy John Grant. John Grant is our friend. He has a reptile shop in Oklahoma. He just wants us to say that he said hi. He was nerding out when we told him we were going to have you on, and he was so jealous. He just wanted to make sure that we said that John Grant said hi to Kathy Love.
Well, cool. Hi,
and he has two girls who might be following in your footsteps one day too.
Yeah.
Because they do everything at the shows with their parents. It's awesome.
Well, that's great.
So back then it was a completely different, not only was it different in the keeping of reptiles, but the type of reptiles everybody was keeping back then was different, right? You didn't have ball pythons everywhere. You didn't have morphs. I mean, y'all were keeping mostly native stuff, right?
Well, somewhat, but it seemed like a big part of the hobby back then was guys who kept big snakes like Burmese pythons. And of course, I wanted my own Burmese python too. So I was able to get a baby Burmese python all back before we ever started Living Jungle. I think probably when I was about 19 or 20, I got my first one, and it turned into a big monster like they all do. But the guys who were into it, most of them seemed to like the really big snakes. And I think part of what drew more women in was a little bit later when corn snakes got really popular and when morphs started getting more popular, and also leopard geckos. So many women from back then started getting interested when their husband or boyfriend had snakes, and then they introduced the wife or girlfriend to leopard geckos, and that got a lot of them into it. I kind of remember way back when Mark Bell first got married to Kim Bell, even before they got married, I think. She was more interested in leopard geckos and then later got interested in everything. And I was talking to Mark about it way back then. That goes back to the 70s, I think. And we remarked about that if you look at the history of most people who have been into reptiles for decades and decades, and you ask them what first got them started, most men will tell you they were interested in dinosaurs as a kid, really interested in dinosaurs.
Yeah.
Most women will tell you that they were really interested in live animals of some sort, whether they were lizards or sometimes snakes. I was more into the snakes. So I have noticed that dichotomy that holds true most of the time.
I can feel like we can confirm that. I can also confirm the leopard gecko theory.
I really liked those
because I have always loved leopard geckos, and I have one now also in my classroom.
I think it became like Kathy said, it became when reptiles became pretty. Like
Exactly.
I do like the colors.
When you had all the colors and the patterns, and you can make them look different than the normal thing.
Yeah.
Because there's certain things you can show someone who hates snakes, and you can show them like a piebald ball python, and they'll go, "Oh, that's cool." Like there's certain things you can just show people, and they'll start to like it all.
And regular corn snakes, the patterns and the colors are one of my favorite, but I like the bolder look of the Okatee over the regular. I mean, give me just a traditional Okatee corn snake any day of the week, and I'm happy.
Yes. Well, I've always been a color person. I love colors. Even in my salads, I look at it as something beautiful before I eat it. And
we couldn't tell that from your shirt.
In the corn snakes and other snakes, I've always been drawn to the colors, and also I have an artistic side, but I'm no artist. I'm lucky to draw a stick figure, but I've been able to use the artist palette of colors in corn snakes to kind of fulfill my artistic ambitions without having any art talent.
I agree with, absolutely.
So a couple of things that you said just really rang true with me. First of all, I remember when Katie and James started dating, and we went to Daytona, and Katie was all about the lizards.
Oh, I love it. I still like the lizards.
You like some of the corn snakes he got. That's when James first really got into corn snakes.
Yeah.
You got, I don't remember how many.
I got 5 at that show. Yeah.
And you like the colors, but I remember you were always going to the lizard folks. But the other thing that you said that I think stands true, and maybe y'all can correct me, I'm certainly not as in touch with the hobby, but the artistic side of it seems to draw, the hobby seems to draw, I guess it's because y'all are free thinkers. Maybe that's the right word, but artistic people and people who are creative and a guy makes a living drawn on a computer making racks. That's that artistic and creative
not rectangles.
I think it's a hobby that pulls in fringe people, and artistic people tend to be fringe people, and they fit in pretty well with the rest of us weirdos that everybody else thinks is weird.
And I think there's lots of different types of the artistic ability, because some people are going to say building a rack is not artistic, but you're taking rectangles and you're building a structure.
And also, when you've designed some of the cages and stuff, you change a few things in the way you design it. So
I like my cages. They're not just rectangles. I do a little bit of artistic, the way I do my vents, and we all do it a little different. I've seen some at shows that it's just like, okay, these guys had zero. It is a basic cage. They're selling it for a basic price. So,
well, don't sell yourself short, because I've seen some of your spray paint work and it's amazing.
Oh yeah. I enjoy that. I need to do some of that.
Then there's someone,
it's so fun.
There's someone like Adeline Robinson who does reptile art, and her reptile art is just amazing. It's so realistic.
So. I think maybe even a better word in my case would be creative than artistic, because I've always loved the creative aspect of the hobby. For me, that started with way back when there were no reptile products, and we had to go to all different kinds of places to find them and make them into reptile products. I even gave a talk once at the IHS when it was in Tennessee, I think it was, back maybe about 79 or so, about making snake sexing probes from knitting needles and crochet hooks and things like that.
Oh,
So
wow.
we're always looking to do something creative, and whether it's creative with trying to produce an animal that you have never produced before by using parents that you think might make it or get closer to it, or whether it was finding products that didn't exist that you were going to somehow make them work. The creativity has always appealed to me.
I can't imagine making your own snake probes from knitting needles. Like
That's a brilliant idea, though. It really is.
So like that's just make sure you dull that tip first on your sewing needle before you shove it in there.
Yeah.
Well, another thing that I found useful to make, because they were getting harder to find, I often use feeding tubes for some of the baby snakes that don't want to eat, because I found it easier to use ferret food and blend it up in the blender with a little bit of water and make a mixture that I can tube, because ferrets also eat rodents as their primary food. And the owner of Pretty Pet told me, like back in the 90s, that they actually had mice analyzed at a laboratory, different ages of mice, and found out their components of fat and carbohydrates and so forth. And they modeled their ferret food after a young adult mouse. So he said he was the one who suggested this to me in the 90s, and I've been doing it ever since. So I would take,
smart.
yeah, I thought it was great. So I used the ferret food that I pulverized in the blender, and it's been harder to find the old style metal feeding tubes in recent years. So I found out that if you take a turkey basting needle that you find around Thanksgiving, and I would get my husband to dull and polish the end of it, the side openings that you would use to baste the turkey actually let out more of the mixture than the original feeding tube, which had a very narrow lumen. And if you didn't completely pulverize and even sieve out any little chunks that were left, it would stop up the needle. So the turkey basting thing actually works really well.
That is so fabulous.
That's the weird things, like someone wouldn't think walking through Walmart and seeing a turkey baster thing on the wall going,
Necessity.
that would work.
Necessity is the mother of all invention.
I always think like that when I'm walking through Walmart or some container store or whatever. I wonder if that would work for this or that or the other thing.
I know some other people that do the same
I'm bad
thing.
about that at container stores anywhere. When there's a tub, I'm like, I can turn that.
Fellas that do that on a regular basis.
Yeah, most definitely. Container store, Walmart. I'm like, could that be a hide? That man,
Mm-hmm.
I don't do it as much as I used to, but I definitely used to do it a lot.
I don't do it as much because now I'm semi-retired. I only keep 2 or 3 dozen adult snakes and some blue tongue skinks. Have a few litters or clutches a year, but it's more of a hobby now. It's not the full-time business it used to be.
Yeah, you just had a litter of blue tongue skinks, right? Northerns?
Yeah, I did. Last year I had the most I've ever had because I only have 2 females. Last year I had about 30 of them. This year,
Oh, wow.
11 from one.
So I'm going to ask, because I was told the day that post was made about that litter, is there a waiting list for your blue tongues?
No, I haven't really started advertising them yet because they were actually bigger than usual because it was a smaller litter. And it's like 115 degrees a lot of days here in Arizona right now. So I'm not planning on doing any shipping real soon. I'll probably take some to the Tucson show in October if there's any left. But as soon as it's not in the hundreds here anymore, I probably will advertise them and start a waiting list.
Yeah. So anybody listening, make sure you forget what she just said. She doesn't
Yeah.
have any.
James been one of northern.
He has
forever.
wanted a northern for years, and when he
I think he
told
just
me,
set an alarm on his phone for when
Yeah.
it goes below 100 degrees in Tucson.
he was like, "Guess who has northerns?" I was like, "Oh my gosh!" He's like, "That waiting list is probably insane."
So you said you're down to just a couple dozens of animals. How many did you have when you were really breeding corns and
Wow.
snakes on a large scale?
When I was in Florida and I was doing it full time, I think I had, I used to produce about 5,000 babies a year of various kinds of colubrids. A lot were corns, but some were kings and milks and other kinds of rat snakes.
I have no idea what kind of number I thought she was going to throw
But it
out.
wasn't 5,000?
Not that. Holy moly.
Yes, something like that. And then there were some other things that I was heavily involved in, but not in large numbers, like Amazon tree boas. Back when I was doing it as a business, I think I had third generation babies that I had really been starting to get some really bright yellow and orange ones. And I had some other projects, and now I still have other projects. I've really been getting into the Tricolor Hognose, and I like those a lot.
I heard those are a tricky one. One to keep alive for a long period of time, and then two to reproduce.
Actually, that's not true. That was
cool.
true back in the 90s when we imported some wild-caught adults into Glades Herb to sell. They just did not do well. They didn't eat well. Most of the customers we ever sold them to, they died. But a few lived, and they started producing babies. And it turns out they're extremely prolific.
I've heard that.
And the babies are, I have a higher percentage of baby tricolor hogs feed on pinkies without any special work than I do corn snakes. They're really easy to get feeding on thawed pinkies. So they're very easy. The one thing that they do is they seem to have a reproductive strategy of live fast, die young.
That's what I've heard. Yeah.
Yeah, they might have 4 or 5 clutches in a year if you don't stop them by stopping feeding them and cooling them down. That's why I don't breed mine until March, so that by the time they've had enough clutches, I can start cooling them down. So they have a lot of babies, but they breed maybe at a year and a half if you feed them all they want to eat. But by about 4 and a half, they're pretty much done producing viable eggs. And by 5 or 6, most of them have died of old age. The oldest one I've heard anybody claim to have on one of the farms I'm on was between 7 and 8 years old. So they're not a long-lived species like corn snakes.
Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, especially I was thinking when you're dealing with corn snakes, it can live 20s and 30s. It's definitely weird. Especially, I mean, how big is a clutch from a tricolor? Just one, I guess one clutch. I know they can double and triple, but
right. On their first clutch or two, it's often like in the 5-ish number, but by the time they've had a couple clutches, they're often up in the 7 to 10, and the biggest one I ever got, I believe, was about 14.
Wow, that's cool. What's the biggest?
Pretty small. Most of the babies are 7 or 8 grams when they hatch out, which most of my baby corns are more like 10 or 12 grams, but they're very stretchy. And 7 or 8 gram tricolor hog can often eat thawed pinky, a very small thawed pinky without cooling it up.
That's one of the things I always find funny when people, because I breed sand boas, and you sell a baby sand boa or a baby corn, and they go, yeah, no, it's eating pinky mice, and then people look at you like you just told them to feed it an elephant. I'm like, I promise it can take a baby mouse. Just give it to it.
Well, the tricolor hogs I usually don't sell until they've had 6 unscented thawed pinkies, which they usually eat in deli cups. It's easier to feed them that way, because they're still a little more expensive and people are a little wary of them. So I make sure that they're already well feeding, and they do grow incredibly fast, much faster than corn snake.
I guess just the way they live, they got to grow fast, breed fast, and then die.
Yeah, that just seems to be their strategy. That seems to work for them.
Sounds like a pretty good life to me.
I mean,
Well, and it's
Even breed.
well for people in the hobby, it's weird because they're tricolor hogs, and everybody hears hognose and they automatically think of Western hogs because they're so familiar with them, and they're so different. Just like when you talk about getting like Madagascar giant hognose, and like yes,
Right.
hognose is in the name, but it is not the same thing.
I was just about to Google it because I'm like the only thing I know are the.
Tricolor hogs, they look like king snake. I mean, they're that 3 colors. They're pretty.
But the only hog nose that I'm familiar
It's
with.
Western.
Yeah.
It's everybody.
And that's true for so many, especially the first couple of years I took them to shows when they were still pretty rare. They're more common now. People would come up and say, wow, I didn't know they came in that color. I'd like to breed those with my Westerns. And I had to break the bad news to them that they're not really at all the same thing.
Yeah. These are as cute as can be.
Oh yeah.
Oh, they're adorable.
Oh,
I did notice some interesting things that made me think in a way I didn't think of before. The babies of the tricolors are very kind of spastic, very much like a coral snake is, and very much like some of the milk snakes, like Honduran milk snakes, are spastic like that too, and they just whip from side to side. And I didn't really think about the connection of that kind of behavior, say when I used to breed Honduran milks compared to the coral snakes that we've caught, until I saw the hognose doing the very same thing. And it kind of dawned on me, it appears that they're not only mimicking the color and the pattern, but they're mimicking some of the behavior too. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
That is neat. And it would make sense. Whatever works for one, I mean, everything that works for the coral snake should work for all the things that look like a coral snake.
Well, I just finished listening to The Snake Charmer, the book about Joe Slowinski.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I didn't realize how much that Dynodon mimics the mini banded crates so much that it's one scale that you have to look at on their head.
That's the one he got bit by, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
To tell the difference. And that's how he ended up, eventually getting bitten on 9/11. Was there was 2 of them in a bag, and one of them had bitten the guy who collected it. Well, it was the other one that had bitten him. And so they thought they were both the Dynodon. It's a wolf snake, and turns out it wasn't.
Yeah, that was a rough one.
It's a good book if you haven't read it.
It's on my list.
Does it talk in that book? Does it talk about like how he wrote down what happened as he was?
Yes,
Because I know he kept records as he died, basically.
Well, it was verbal.
Yeah.
Yeah, he told the group he was with, here's what's going to happen. My eyelids are going to quit working, and then my lungs are going to stop, and you're going to have to give me mouth to mouth. And they did it for 26 hours.
Oh
Damn.
my gosh.
And until they just couldn't, and it was 9/11.
Yeah.
So the whole world shut down basically. So it's crazy, man.
It's an audiobook though, so you could listen to that one and you wouldn't have to
And
read.
it's only like 7 hours long.
You could totally do that.
When you're driving, it goes by like that.
Sure, and go on the way to a reptile expo.
There you go.
Okay.
Perfect.
It's a million hours to get down to Corpus, so I can do that there and back. And
There we
Oh,
could.
yeah. So I listened to it to and from Slidell.
Slidell.
Could
Yeah.
our kid listen to it?
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Okay,
there's a
cool.
couple of cuss words, but no.
Yeah,
better than
that's
you guys
fine.
say, so.
She's my
She's
kid. She'll be fine.
But the narrator actually breaks down some of the, like anytime they talk about a new species, he gives the common name, the scientific name, and then characteristics of it. He does say some things incorrectly, like the way he pronounces. You can tell he's not a reptile guy. The way he pronounces some of the snakes, like he calls them krites.
Crite.
And
Old sea crite.
yeah, there's a couple of them. I'm like, what? Oh, okay, I know what he means. Like instead of saying elephant, because when the book was written, it was when it was before they reclassified the rat snakes.
Yeah.
He butchers it every time, but still pretty good.
So that's what I hear every time. So you're talking about the Slowinski, and you have I'll say it for Joe, but the Slowinski's corn snake, which I know as the Kasachi corn snake because I lived there.
Right.
But hearing people when they try to say Kasachi, oh my God.
Yeah, just call it Slowinski.
It gets butchered every time. I'm like, that is not even close to how you say that.
Yep.
But that's also cool. I mean, did you ever have any of those corn snakes, the Kasachi corns?
Me? No, I never kept any of those.
They are there, and we had one. So when I first started working at the zoo in Central Louisiana, we had a corn snake when I got there, and corn snakes I knew were corn snakes, like what everybody's used to. And I got there, and this one is it's brown, with black markings and brown inside the saddles, but it was big. I mean, it was like 6 foot. And it wasn't until like a few years later I realized that there was Kasachi corns. I was like, okay, well, that's what that was.
Yeah.
That was definitely not a regular corns. Like that was a Kasachi
That was
corn.
the one in the.
Yeah, the dog trot building.
I
It
have
was
4.
yeah, you have
4 because I gave Megan one.
Yeah.
So I'm interested. They're getting big and they're feisty.
they get big.
Yeah.
They get big and they're pretty when they. I mean, they're a pretty snake. They're but like I said, when you think corn snake, you're thinking reds and oranges because that's what I normally I think close to an Okatee when I think corn snake, but it's not a Slowinski or a Kasachi corn.
A couple of things from the chat. John Grant had his first ever batch of palmettos, and they ate tonight.
Clutch.
Batch. They're not cookies.
I mean,
Although he did have to
same
cook them.
thing.
They came
Same thing.
not the same thing. They came out of a water moccasin nest.
Yeah, the old water moccasin. Got to watch out for them.
Stars. But he said that was something he's wanted ever since he was a little kid. So that's awesome. I'm glad they're doing well. Darren Watson wanted to know if you had employees or.
Well, she did when they were Glades Herb. They did.
Okay. And did they have the experience with the herps, or did you provide that first experience for them?
Well, back when we had Glades Herp, we did have several employees, and of course it wasn't just corn snakes. We had a hot room, and we had amphibians and lizards and everything, most of which we didn't breed. But at that time, I kept up my colubrid breeding at the home ranch, and then I would bring in the babies to Glades Herp to sell. So yeah, we did have employees, and most of them were reptile people. Later on, I would have a part-time employee just helping me during baby season when we left Glades Herp, and I was doing it back at home again. But I never had any full-time employees when I was just doing it as a home business.
That's awesome. And then I guess it's Ashley with Focus Cubed. It might be her and Steven, I'm not sure. But she said that book in particular and Lizard King is also a great listen. And I read the Lizard King on the way to Daytona on our honeymoon. That was one of the books I read.
Yeah,
or did I read it?
You read it because then we got to Daytona and you started to realize the names.
I was like,
in the
oh
book
yeah,
were
the
at
names
Daytona.
of the books were the people that were at the show. That was interesting for me because I was not real into reptiles at that point in our relationship.
There are so many cool books out there. My husband Bill is now reading Doug Mader's book, and I don't have it here in front of me. I don't remember the name, but it's all about his veterinary work from the very beginning when he just started and until presumably now. Bill hasn't finished the book yet, but he is glued to it. He says it's great.
Like I said earlier, that I think it's important for anybody that is in the hobby as a hobby person. If you really enjoy this hobby, it's important to learn the history of it. So like I said, if you own corn snakes now and you really like, I breed corn snakes, I'm a corn snake breeder, and you don't know, if you don't know Kathy, you don't know Lee Abbott, if you don't know the folks that got us to where we are now, you really should. I'm not saying it's a necessity and you have to, but it's very interesting, and that's why I like getting you on here, because more people need to hear this stuff. I do want to go through the question you came up with, because I thought it was a pretty good one, and I want to go through some of those answers, and then I've got some other questions for you. But go ahead.
The book is The Vet at Noah's Ark. Is that the new one?
I believe so. I haven't gotten a chance to read it yet because Bill is hogging it up.
I love it. It says Stories of Survival from an Inner City Animal Hospital.
That's it. Yep.
It's $22 at Target.
He talks about in the early days, he was located in some rough areas of the Los Angeles area and had some hair-raising experiences that had nothing to do with animals. So Bill is just totally absorbed in it. So I'd suggest anybody who's interested to read it. And of course, Bill also wrote an autobiography that I think is really good too.
She's a little partial, but
I mean, that's okay. You're allowed to be.
Y'all done a lot. He's done a lot. I mean, y'all have done a lot in any of those stories would be interesting to hear, especially going. I'd love to go to Madagascar. All the trips you took to Madagascar had to be amazing.
It was pretty exciting. I've only been there twice. Bill was there, I think, I don't know, 6 or 8 times. maybe even more than that. And he was there for about a month each time. I think he spent about 1 year of his life there all total.
And I imagine he had to see the huge change, because I know Madagascar is one of those places where they've lost a ton of rainforest. And so I imagine every trip back had to be different. You know, I went to this place and saw this animal, and then you go back and it's just dirt.
True.
I can tell you that his talk about Madagascar, how many years ago?
I was 17 years ago. I mean, it
Was the only thing that I had any interest. You know, we went to that show and he's going nuts over everything. And he says, I want to go listen to this talk. And I sat there mesmerized through the talk. So that you can give him that compliment, that some guy who doesn't really care anything about snakes was mesmerized by his talk.
It is a great place to go to if you ever get a chance. Not just reptiles, but plants. We used to have a friend who was into plants like we were reptiles, and Bill would take pictures of the plants there for him. So plants, animals of all kinds, anything to do with nature, Madagascar is a great place to go.
I've got to go there before they cut down all the trees.
Yeah.
So
Did you see Casey Cannon posted a little while ago that he was looking at flights to Port Moresby, Papua New Guinea yesterday, and when he was Googling to find it, the first thing that popped up was a news story about violence in their elections, and he pulled it up, and it's people hacking each other with machetes at the voting booth. He's like, maybe I'll just wait a little while before I go to
Let all that calm down.
Papua New Guinea. Yeah.
Well, we're not quite to that yet. Let's hope we don't get there.
Yeah. Well, that's somebody commented, Jason Hood. He said, if you read some of the comments, it's the same us versus them propaganda, just like we're dealing with here. And that's what's caused the violence there.
but we have guns, not machetes. It's fine.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So let's get to our question. The question this week was, for those who keep North American colubrids, is your primary attraction their patterns and colors, the ability to use those colors and patterns as an artistic expression in producing new babies, or the personalities, or some other reason? And we had several, so I'm gonna go through those, and then we'll talk to Kathy about why she did it. I mean, because it's a larger scale than anybody here that commented. But let's see. Will McReady said, I much prefer the natural phenotypes to morphs. I love the patterns and colors, but personality certainly plays a big role. He likes Pituophis, which I've got Louisiana pines. I know you've had bulls. They have personality. It may not always be a good personality, but they definitely have a personality. Plus the natural, like the feel of a bull snake or a pine snake of any of this Pituophis is just so much cooler because of the texture.
Mm-hmm.
I do love that texture.
Yeah, it's especially if you're used to like boas and ball pythons and corn snakes and king snakes, which are all smooth, and then you hand someone a bull snake. It's thick, it's keeled scales. It feels completely different, and it's strong.
It's funny that you bring that up because you've gotten real into samboas in the last few years, and you've got one that is different than the rest.
I've got a lot that are different.
No, but like texture wise or something it does with its tail, like it holds on or something.
Well, the regular samboas in general are super smooth until you get down to the tail, and then it's heavily keeled at the tail.
I just remember the first time you handed me this particular snake, you were like, okay, it's gonna do this. Don't freak out, it's different.
The Indian samboas. So the Indian samboas have like an actual tail. So whereas if you're used to a samboa that falls off your hand if you're not careful because they're goofy and they don't hold on stuff, the Indian samboas will wrap their tail like around your finger, and it's the weirdest thing if you're not used to a samboa holding on.
I just remember when you like gave it to me to hold for the first time, you were like, heads up, this is gonna happen. Yeah. It's different.
Yeah, it will hold on. Daniel Cruz said, I just mostly like the personalities of them. She also the colors of bull snakes. Again, bull snakes have a personality. It's sometimes good. Brandon P says, I would have to say both. My favorite being, he also said bull snakes. They definitely have beautiful colors and patterns with distinct personalities. Our buddy Corey Martin says she breeds hognoses purely for the top hats, so she can put top hats on them.
Chris asked who that was, and I said it's James's dad. He said he looks younger than James.
Whoever that is, love you.
Fuck you, Chris.
I was
Of course,
answers like that.
The bad thing is I act younger too. So.
That is true. I had some answers on Instagram. So our buddy Travis Wyman from Snakes and Bakes on Instagram said, I keep Alterna because they were one of the grail species for me after seeing them in the Audubon guide. I do not really care one way or the other about morphs in that genus. And that's kind of, so you know,
I've seen Travis argue with people over those morphs.
I know.
Genus.
So ball pythons became the big thing in the early 2000s, but prior to that, I mean, corn snakes were the morph animal prior to that because there were so many colors. But then you get to like Alterna, that king snakes are a whole different thing. I know in the 70s, 80s, and all, people were really big into keeping colubrids, and like Alterna was a huge thing, and still is. It's getting back there, but before we got into this morph craze of boas and ball pythons, our native colubrids like Alterna were a huge thing, right?
Oh, yeah, we're so lucky in this country to have so many cool colubrids. I mean, there's cool colubrids all over the world, but not in the kind of quantity and diversity that we have.
Right.
We're really lucky for that, to grow up and actually be able to go where you could catch them, or at least wherever it's still legal now. I kept some Alterna too back, I think, in the 80s, but the babies were just a bit of a pain, and I had too many animals then, so I gave them up.
That's like I've said it on here before. It was a snake I can't get into. I can't get into low-cal snakes. Like I'm not focused enough to be like, I keep only this species from this side of the road in this desert south of this cactus. That's the only snakes I keep.
Is it that intense?
Alternative, they are like, it's very area specific.
You realize that in like a week, Travis is going to message me and be like, it is not that dramatic.
No, it is.
They're pretty picky about their locales. Some people are. And, and I'm glad that there's room enough for everybody to do whatever they happen to like to do. True. I never got too interested in the locale. To me, if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck. But you know, to each his own.
Yeah, that's where I am. That's why I like corn snakes are cool, and just because of the large area that rat snakes in general cover in the U.S. I mean, I don't know if people ever look at a map of the range of rat snakes, but it is huge. I mean, you're going from Florida all the way up to Pennsylvania, and then all the way out to Louisiana. When you get into the Great Plains, you go past that into Oklahoma, you get Great Plains rat snakes in Texas. And so it's such a huge range for rat snakes, even though they keep reclassifying them and putting them into different groups, and I can't keep up with that. But
yeah, talking to Terry this weekend, it sounds like it's all about to change again.
Where they're going to have the western rat can't cross the Mississippi River.
Yeah, and then there's going to be like I don't remember. He said an eastern and a Florida, and they're breaking it all up again.
At one point, they took the Everglades rat and they tried to put it into a group with other. I'm like, the Everglades rat looks different than everything else. Yeah. It is a different snake.
Yeah.
Well, that is true. But on the other hand, when we lived in Florida, most of our adult lives, we went and looked for a lot of rat snakes down in the range of the Everglades rat snakes. And you could be deep in the range of Everglades rat snake and have just, typical yellow rat snakes.
Yeah.
I always thought, just from what I saw and common sense, that maybe they're what we would think of as being a true Everglades rat snake with all the characteristics. Maybe that's kind of relict populations of what used to be a wide range of pure populations before roads and drainage and people and agriculture changed everything.
Yeah, that definitely changed. I mean, especially when you get down there, roads in general and the way they've cut waterways through there have changed a lot of how any of those animals would have naturally evolved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think yellow rat snakes have mostly taken over, but every so often you find a really pretty orange one with the red-orange tongue and all that.
I'm gonna get into the morphs in a little bit because there's some other ones down there I want to talk about, but let me go through the rest of these answers and then I'll get to those because I do want to talk. Dan Magano, he keeps mostly bloods and short tails, but he said I only keep one colubrid in my entire collection, and it's an eastern rat snake. He says I love the species because they're so intelligent and engaging, often nosy, and have to be involved in the middle of everything. They display fantastic and aren't at all bothered by things going on around them, other than their need to be nosy. The wild ones locally are stunning, melanistic examples, so that would be a secondary reason. But the one I have is a rather bland looking, so she's here for personality, not looks. It's also, if someone's used to something like a ball python, because a lot of people now get into the hobby and they get ball pythons. The personality of a corn snake or a rat snake in general is drastically different than that of a ball python.
Oh boy, for sure. I have a pair of albino ball pythons that we use for python photos at the shows, and there's something to be said for their laziness, for people who want to drape a snake around them while they watch TV. But I don't find their personality nearly as appealing as the colubrids.
Yeah, because colubrids, I mean, you can, it's one thing, certain snakes, you can look in their eyes and you can see that there's a thought process going on and they are looking around trying to figure out what the next move is. That snake is
Yeah.
not a ball python.
That's one reason I always loved reticulated pythons, and I did have a couple when I was young, and I also had a Jampia dwarf, back in the 90s. Now that they're super dwarfs and they're getting to be morphs of them, I have considered getting some super dwarfs, but I'm very short on space now, and even a super dwarf needs more room than a corn snake.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I'll ever get them, but boy, when you watch retics and the way they move and the way they look at you, there is something going on in that brain, unlike most of the giant snakes.
The weirdest one, and I've talked about, the weirdest one I've ever seen was a black mamba. When we were in Florida at
Cody and Pia's.
Cody and Pia's.
That was the most terrifying thing I've ever
Cody
seen.
Bartolini has massive black mambas, and they are 100% looking at you and thinking of what they need to do next, and it's unsettling.
I mean, first of all, you feel so safe in their environment that they have with everything. Everything is just absolutely beautifully set up with the cages. Just everything is outstanding. But it's watching some of these animals 100% knowing they are smarter than I am.
Well, you talk to keepers that keep greens or blacks, and they say they test every inch of that enclosure.
Yeah.
They test every inch every day, trying to find a weakness.
See, that's another reason I would love to have an indigo at some point. I just don't want to deal with all the poop. But indigos are a huge North American colubrid that is intelligent and like problem solving, and it's such a cool snake compared to, don't get me wrong, I love my sand boas, but sand boas are pretty stupid. I mean, I've watched them.
Back in the 90s, when we had Glades Herp, we got in an adult black mamba that was supposedly Joe Baraducci's pet at one time. And he was pretty tame, but he was still a black mamba. Yeah. So we did take him home to Bill's photo studio, because Bill was really into photography at that time. And it was a big photo studio, really nice setup. And I was there to just kind of help him wrangle animals and such. That black mamba never did anything that he shouldn't do. He moved around slowly and methodically, but I was still standing by the door because I could just read his mind. Like he was thinking.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely.
It's weird on those things. A couple more answers here for the question. Herps and Hot Rods on Instagram said, I enjoy them for their natural colors and their personalities, but my Gulf hammock rat snake is just very curious and shy. She has different shades of browns and tans, but you can see bits of white and red from her skin poking out the scales. My wife has a black and white Cali King who doesn't like a black and white snake. Katie, with your black snakes over there. She is very active.
Nothing wrong with that.
It says she is very active and food motivated, which are all king snakes are food motivated. But one of the most handleable snakes we have. And then last one, Queen City Constrictor says personalities. They like them. Indigos are so interesting behaviorally, and they're fun and different to feed than other snakes. Their size and color doesn't hurt though. And king snakes' defensive posture and food drive makes them irresistible to them. So a wide range. But what I'm assuming, we're talking colors. What drew you? I'm assuming colors drew you to corn snakes. Although when you got into corn snakes, there wasn't what we have now.
No, but I've always liked snakes that are highly variable. That's why I was also drawn to Amazon tree boas. And I not only liked having animals, even in their natural colors, that look very different from each other, as naturally colored corn snakes do. You have everything from naturally occurring Miami phase type, almost like an Alterna looking, to Okeetees. And, the first blood reds actually came from the wild near St. Augustine. So you have all that huge variety in corn snakes and Amazon tree boas and some other species. And that's why I was drawn to them. And then the other reason was, whether it was Amazon tree boas or corn snakes, I always had that creativity bug that I wanted to produce something different than what I already had. And that was one of the reasons that way back in the 80s, when we had a lot of different king snakes and such, One of the things that we bred was the Mexican black kings that were really black, and some of the babies weren't so black. So we worked for a while to try to get ones that even the babies were black. But I got bored with them after a few generations, because once you've got one that's jet black, you're basically finished, as pretty as it is. What else are you going to do? Whereas with a corn snake or an Amazon tree boa, you're always going to be trying to figure out what adults you're going to put together to get something that's a little bit different than anything you've produced before. And that ability for creativity has really drawn me to them.
Well, corn snakes are interesting because there's so many color patterns, so many our color morphs, so many pattern morphs, and then when you mix two things together, it gives you something completely different in the way they react. 'Cause I know, correct me if I'm wrong, the original blood reds, they have figured out since then that blood red is not just one gene, right? There's several things that were in that.
Right, that is true. And the plain belly trait seems to be inherited somewhat separately. Now, in the last, I don't know, 15 years or so, I've been turning it more into a hobby. Basically, since the last big recession, I trimmed down a lot, and it's more of a hobby now, and I don't follow all the newest genetic stuff. I only keep what I'm interested in, which is mostly oketees of various types. And I did just get some palmettos last year, too. I like those, too. But I haven't kept up with all the more recent findings in genetics. But we were the first ones not to get blood reds, but to buy the project from Eddie Leach, who started it, and to promote it and breed it widely. And we actually picked out the name. He was calling it corn gold. So we were experimenting. At that time, they tended to have very large litters of very tiny babies that didn't want to eat. And the males had some fertility problems. So, of course, we outcrossed them to various different things. And we found out that the plain belly was not an all or nothing trait, but it could be inherited somewhat separately from the tendency towards having a sort of a uniform color with very small black borders. And so as time went on, people did call it different things, because it was not just in normal colored corns anymore. It was in anerythristic and everything else.
So in the group, in the chat here, Deadly Tarantula Girl wants to know if you bred locale specific oketees.
What I did back in the 80s when I first started breeding oketees, there were not very many corn snake breeders at the time. We caught a couple, and we also bought some or traded for some, like second or third generation from several breeders around the country, and they assured us that theirs originated from Jasper County. We weren't necessarily looking for the Hunt Club, but Jasper County. And as far as I know, mine are all descended many, many, many generations ago from Jasper County. But I certainly wouldn't bet my life on it, because we didn't collect them ourselves.
That's an interesting one to me. And I'm with Katie. I think oketee corns are beautiful, and they're a funny one because if you know the history of them, oketee corns are from one little section, like you said, that hunting club is where they became famous, and that pattern was found there in that population, but it became a pattern morph more than a locale. You know, it starts out as a locale thing. It's where everybody found them, but now everybody tries to breed them to have that thick black border and have that vibrant color, and it's become a pattern thing more than thinking of it as a locale thing.
Right. And actually, over the years, I've noted that most of the people who say, I want a locality oketee, it's got to be from there, when they saw pictures of the ones that we actually caught ourselves and put into our group, they would be very disappointed, because although a few of those from that area look exactly what like the best ones look like now that you could buy from Lee Abbott or anybody else, most of the ones that you catch up there are rather disappointing. They mostly have some really pretty color. They mostly have some really big blotches, but a lot of them have borders that are nothing like the thick black borders that everybody wants and that you can find in captive bred ones that have been selectively bred.
Didn't you use an Okatee with your biology lesson?
Oh, I never had a normal, so I would use the Okatee as the normal just to show color when I was doing genetics. Because I had an albino and I had an anery, and I would always use my Okatee because.
So explain that lesson that you use, because that's probably one of my favorite things that you do with teaching.
So that was when I would teach basic Punnett squares in biology to high school students. So I would use the Okatee to show the normal colors, the reds, the blacks, the oranges. And then I would show them an albino to show when you remove melanin, you have the oranges and the whites. And then I would show the antheristic to show when you remove the oranges and the reds. And then I would eventually show them a snow when you wipe everything away and it's a solid white snake. But yeah, the Okatee just had vibrant colors. It was easy to show. It was easy to show a kid, this is the normal color of a corn snake. And you weren't that far off from it being a natural colored corn snake, because originally they were that population is a natural color of corn snake. So that's why I would use it for that. Do you have something?
And I sold quite a few projects to teachers and biology teachers way back when I was doing it as a real business. And I would, based on how many animals they could accommodate and what their budget was, I would get them together, a group of animals that were either showing those traits or some of those traits or the combination traits or heterozygous, so that over a period of time they could breed them and they could prove out the hets, and over a period of time they could make the squares and predict what should have happened and then find out what did happen. It was great biology stuff.
So that's another thing in the hobby I find funny. You see people at shows talking about their het this and het that. And I just wonder what percentage of those people actually know what het stands for.
I heard a vendor this weekend a brand new vendor that I'd never seen before.
Trying to explain what heterozygous means, and they weren't even using. They were calling it heteromorph. They were like not even using the right word, and I'm like, oh, that's. So after the customer walked off, I said, hey, I'm not an expert by any means.
But either are you.
But
thank God James wasn't there.
I'd given him a lesson.
Thank God Joe wasn't there.
My daughter would, 11-year-old daughter would have given him a lesson.
Yeah, Logan could have too, but he wasn't there either. So,
well, it's out of the customers, but it's a shame when the vendors don't understand. If they bred it themselves and they still don't understand. One example that I used for people who never took high school biology that seemed really helpful, that people who don't understand what just a basic simple recessive trait is or how it works, I used an example that seemed to bring it home to them. I said, if you got a collie and a beagle and they were albinos and you bred them together, then you would get all albinos because that's a simple recessive trait. But you wouldn't get all collies and you wouldn't get all beagles because there's many, many, many different genes that make a beagle and a collie. But you only need that one gene or one pair of genes for the albino. And when you did it like that and they could visualize dog breeds, that seemed to help them understand better.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Well, and that's another change I imagine you've seen in the hobby, in 60s, 70s, 80s, people that were in the reptile hobby were reptile people. So they were learning reptile things. Whereas now a lot of people get into this hobby as a business. Like they jump, they're not a reptile person. Those are also the ones that we see get out of it. Like we talked about before, in like 3 or 4 years, they jump out, but they didn't take the time to learn everything that came with it. And so simple things like knowing what het means and knowing that that's not a word, that is an abbreviation for a word, or what simple recessive is, or what incomplete dominant is.
That was on a test I took.
Was it?
It was when I had to take my science exam for teaching in Texas, because I had to retake everything when we moved here. That was incomplete dominance was on there, and I was like, I know this one. It was great. I was pumped. I was like, I remember. The struggle is so real.
But I imagine that's a huge difference from you being around where it was mostly just like you got into reptiles, you're a reptile person, versus now someone is a reptile breeder because they went out and bought a bunch of ball pythons.
That is true, but I guess I haven't been as involved in it as deeply in the last decade or so. And I guess that if somebody had spent a lot of money and they were making it their whole business, that they would have learned some of the basics, because otherwise, how would you know how you're going to produce your various different ball pythons, and especially when you're using combination genes and when some of your animals are het, even if you don't know what that stands for, that they would have to know some basics. But what I've seen the big difference in is what I kind of alluded to a little bit earlier was the mainstream people. The fact that back then, anybody who kept more than one pet snake or lizard usually was into learning all about them in the natural history and anything they could learn. Whereas now we are kind of divided into what I call herpers, although some people out here in Arizona only say they're herpers if they're field collectors. The field collecting is a big thing here in Arizona, so even when it was in Florida. But there's herpers, and then there's what I call pet keepers. And the pet keepers are the people who just want a couple of pet lizards or snakes or whatever just because they think they're cool and they're fun pets. And most of the time they do learn enough to keep it properly and have the proper heat and lighting and whatever they need. But they're not really interested in digging deeper than that any more than most people who keep dogs and cats want to learn about the whole natural history of all of the wild canines and felines. So I don't necessarily see anything wrong with that as long as I learn proper husbandry. But it is a different world than it was a few decades ago.
Well, and to me anyway, it seems like it's less, like you were to less fringe now than it was, I would think, during the 70s and 80s.
Definitely.
And there's people who are passionate about the business as opposed to the animals. And they think maybe that's a way to get, make quick money or, with something they think is cool rather than start it as you all did as a hobby and really learn it and look at it from a more scientific point of view and grow it into Glades herps. That you couldn't have done that without having that background with it, where nowadays it seems like social media and the internet makes it very easy in any industry. Hot rods, there's guys who can build a hot rod that'll sell for a lot of money, but they don't understand necessarily what they did.
And that is true. And it is kind of sad to me. I still belong to a lot of Facebook reptile forums, and I still answer questions and read stuff at times. But now I see when people ask a question about who are the names that you should know or something like that, usually what they mean are who are the biggest ball python breeders or who were 10 years ago. But they rarely talk about names that I think are so important to all of us, like Dr. Bechtel and Joe Laszlo, people that back in the 70s and 80s were doing things that none of the rest of us were doing and being mentors and teaching us things. Without Dr. Bechtel, who's a dermatologist, which is great for learning about color and pattern in corn snakes and other snakes. When he was kind of doing his research as his hobby, what better person than a dermatologist to be doing that? So, but most people that have not been into it anywhere near as long as I have no idea who Dr. Bechtel was, and they don't really care. Or Joe Laszlo, or any of the other names from back then.
Which, again, I don't think you have to know these things to be a good pet owner. But
Exactly.
if you're like us and you enjoy the hobby, and if you are a reptile nerd, that's the kind of stuff you should want to seek out and find out. Not because you need to, but because it's so interesting, and it's interesting to know where we came from to where we are now. Because just when I got into it in 2003 to where we are now in 2022, it's such a drastically different hobby. And then, from the 70s to now, it is an insanely, it's a completely different world.
That is so true. And Bill and I have always been fairly gregarious. And to us, although, we love the animals, but the people who love the animals were always an important aspect of it to us. We were always into going into all the IHS meetings and those sort of thing before there were, and local herp society meetings, before there were the big shows and meeting people at the shows and all that kind of stuff. So the people in it are just really important to me and always have been.
So I had hold on, pull it up. I had some questions I thought that I wanted to ask you, and I want to make sure I get them out. Oh,
And you typed them down.
I did because I didn't want to forget them. So you've narrowed down your collection now to certain things, but I'm wondering if you could go back, what projects would you do, knowing everything you've known over the time and the path that certain species have taken and where they've gone? Are there any projects you would have done different than the way you went and how you did them?
Good question. I like everything that I did do. I really enjoyed the Amazon tree boa. I'm down to one pair now because Arizona just isn't the easiest place to keep them, and especially to raise babies. I probably would have done even more of those. One thing I always wanted to do in Florida, and I just never did, I always wanted to keep some Sanzenia and breed them outdoors because they just seem to do well out there where we lived in Southwest Florida. Never got the opportunity to do that, and I would have liked to have done that. And once the super dwarf retics became available, that some people have them where they really aren't getting over 7 or 8 feet for females and 6 or 7 feet for males. I would have really liked to have gotten in on that back before I kind of got retired and don't have much space anymore. I probably should have gotten a few of the ball pythons back when they were big because I never made much money doing what I'm doing now, but I had a lot of fun, but I could have had some money and fun.
Well, and the Sanzenia, I might kill somebody if I could get green Sanzenia. When I worked at the zoo, I had a pair there, and those are just amazing.
Which ones were those?
The Madagascar green tree boas.
Okay, I thought that's what they.
Even though they're not really tree, but I mean they are, but they also hang out on the ground too.
When you said the green ones, that's what I was thinking. That it was those.
Yeah, and in the United States, we can get the was it the westerns, or whatever, the yellow ones, which I'm not a big fan of, but the green ones are amazing. And just
I like them all. When we were in Madagascar, it is a shame that they don't export them because they were one of the more common snakes there.
Oh no, I need to go to Madagascar. I just want to find one in the wild. the head of them, it just they're the coolest looking boa to me. I mean, I love emerald tree boas; they're pretty, but a Madagascar tree boa, just the way it scales, look, and the pattern, they're amazing. And then I guess you kind of answered my next question because I would imagine it'd be the dwarf retics. I was going to say, is there anything available now that you wish was around back then? But he's kind of answered it with the dwarf retics or super dwarfs.
I am just totally amazed at the morphs that they've come out with on retics. And I have always been into morphs because I love color and pattern. Some of those retic morphs, the first ones came out quite a long time ago, but they were in animals that were getting way bigger than I want to deal with. And now they're getting into the super dwarfs. That wasn't available back then. And if the super dwarfs had been available in some of the morphs that they are now, and even will be more in the future, I think I could have gotten pretty big into those.
Retics are one of those where just the natural color and pattern is amazing, and then what they can do with it is amazing. But like that's a snake that just so we went to the Houston Zoo this weekend, and they have 2 big retics. They have a normal retic, and then they have a tiger retic, which is like the first morph I remember seeing, and I still love. Every time I see a tiger retic, I'm like, that's the coolest looking retic.
How hot was it at the zoo?
It was warm at the zoo.
Beautiful. Yeah. One of my favorites, though, was the lavender albino or the purple albino ones, and they've been around for a long time in normal size retics. And I even thought about it back when the price started to drop, and then I thought, no, been there, done that with the Burmese. I don't need to be lugging snakes around. I'm not getting any younger.
That's a lot of snakes.
Well, retics almost don't need a morph. They're just so cool looking and natural. They're just, they've always amazed me.
Well, like Kathy said, they're one when you look in their eye, you can see that they are a thinking snake. It looks around. And
James, you can fly from Houston
Yeah,
to
they're always
Madagascar for $1,200 round trip.
That's all. I mean,
it's Kenyan Airways, but still.
On my way tomorrow.
Just saying. Just let you know, you still got a couple weeks till school starts.
So, he's got a long list of things to get done before school starts too. So don't be putting ideas in his head.
When I
Go ahead.
dwarf, that thing was always on the move. Even when she was like 8 or 10 feet long, she acted more like a corn snake or a rat snake, just always moving and going and trying to go upwards, and not anything like some kind of lazy Burmese or ball python or something like that.
Yeah, that's well. I think people don't realize like retics climb trees, like big retics climb trees. There's a video that gets passed around a lot of. It's kind of
this week.
Yeah, it's kind of fast forward a little bit, but of a retic climbing straight up a tree, and it's not a small snake.
Actually, so that was shared in our group. I don't remember who shared it. Danielle maybe shared it. Anyways, and then and a friend of mine who's a Girl Scout leader was like, I know you like snakes, check this out, and like tagged me in it literally while we're recording this podcast. I'm like, yeah, you're the 4th person this week that has sent me this video. That's awesome. But I had a question for you. So one of the things that I've noticed is that the reptile world tends to bleed into my other hobbies. So if I'm working on a quilting project, a lot of times my patterns will deal with lizards or turtles, the stuff that I like, or I'll find fabrics that have those things on them. Or if I'm reading books and we've had a really interesting guest on, or somebody's brought up something, then my books that I'm reading will kind of veer towards that. Do you see that happening with you? Like, do reptiles and your love of this hobby bleed into your other hobbies?
Oh, always. Since I was a small child, my passion was animals, any animals. My father told me when I was 4 years old, I was walking down the street with my mother and father, and he said there was this big, mean-looking, scary dog coming towards us. And I got away from them and ran and threw my arms around the dog and said, "Doggy!" I loved any animals. I didn't care what they were. And that continues to this day. When I was in my early 20s, before I met Bill, I had some older friends. I was into horses at the time, and my lady friends were into horses, and my guy friends were into reptiles. And they were all married to people who didn't share their interest and usually just barely tolerated it. And at that time, I decided if I ever get married, the husband will be passionately into animals of some sort and at least like reptiles. Because otherwise I'd rather stay single than have all the arguments that I saw both my guy and lady friends having. So I was really lucky to find Bill, and we've been married for about 43 years now.
That's so awesome.
So your dad's premonition finally came true that you like boys as much as snakes now?
Well, I like boys if they like snakes.
There you go. Priorities. It's all about the priorities.
And I think people have to have some priorities. It'd be one thing if you have a couple pet snakes or a pet dog or whatever, and it's just one of many of your interests, to have a partner who tolerates it but not really into it wouldn't be a big deal. But if you have a real passion and it's your life, and you marry somebody who barely tolerates it, it just doesn't make for that happy of a life in my observations of many friends.
I agree. You couldn't own snakes on like this. I don't own a ton of snakes. I mean, I have just under 100, but you can't own that many snakes and be married to somebody who hates them. Like I've known people that have gotten into relationships with someone who hates reptiles, and their big thing is collecting reptiles. I'm like, how's that going to work? At some point, someone's going to ask to get rid of something, and it's probably going to be asking to get rid of your snakes or make room for this or that. I'm like, that's going to be a problem.
Tell them I hope you got good credit so you can get your own place.
Yeah,
well, and that's not. I'm sorry. That's not fair to either person.
No.
Sam's marriage counseling here, but that's not smart or fair to either of the parties.
Much better to find somebody. They don't have to have the exact same passion that you do, but there needs to be some overlap. Bill was always much more into the photography, finding reptiles in the wild. He was somewhat into keeping them too, and helped me with the collections, but that was always secondary for him. The wild snakes and the photography was always important. And I think that was actually a good thing, because then we had a lot of overlap, but yet he had his area of expertise and I had my area of expertise. So we weren't always competing with each other, but we had enough overlap to really appreciate each other.
So I was looking, Darren Watson had another pretty good question, and I'm kind of curious about this. He says, we talked about changing in the hobby. So the hobby's changed much since the 70s and 80s, such as lighting, heating, and caging. Are these changes that you embraced immediately as new things came around? Or I know that there are some people, the old people in the hobby, like they keep it the same way they've kept for the last 40 years and they're not changing.
There is some truth to that. There's some truth to both of them, really. Back in the 80s, when we first started doing it on a large scale and there weren't these things available, we kind of pioneered using, well, actually, I think maybe some of the people out in California did before we did, but we started using these heat cables that people use up north to wrap around their water pipes so that they won't freeze. And they still sell them at Home Depot type places, at least up north. And so Bill would take out the built-in thermostat that comes on just before freezing, and he would replace it with like a fan dimmer switch or light dimmer switch or something like that. So you could have infinite control or a high, medium, low. And then we didn't use actual thermostats, but rheostats. And we were able to use bottom heat for all of our cages long before those thin little heat cables, which I do buy some of those now. But a few years ago, we needed an extra long cable. So we went down to the storage garage and dug out one of those old things from the 1980s, plugged it in, and it still worked.
I probably have 1,000 foot of heat
stuff.
cable in my house, just in a drawer.
Really?
Some new stuff mixed with some old stuff. It sometimes takes me a while to come around. I still don't use the thermostats that everybody says are absolutely essential now, because I've been using rheostats for so long and it's worked. Kind of like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Well, I think that also a big difference is you're probably monitoring your collection and your equipment and everything on a regular basis, whereas newer people into the hobby, and myself, I'm lazy sometimes too, kind of need that safety of something that almost idiot-proof thing where put a thermostat on and then I'd never think about it again until I need to turn it off. Yeah, so because with the rheostat, some of the older ones, if you don't watch them, it can get out of hand. But if you're used to how it works, it's definitely it would still function fine today. What amazed me is you could probably post that online in a group, and someone would tell you how wrong you are for what you're doing. Because I've seen that happen to tons of people that are big in the hobby, post one thing in a group, and get told how wrong they are. And I'm like, idiots.
That actually has happened. And there have been a few times over the years when on different corn groups, somebody would say, you have to have a thermostat. You absolutely have to. You're going to burn down your house if you don't. And I would get on there and I would say, well, for a few decades, you've done it this way. I said, but I would suggest if you're going out and buying new equipment, get the thermostat. It's more idiot proof. And somebody would say, no, you can't. But usually somebody in the group would say, well, she has been doing it a long time.
Yeah, that's always, it's someone who's been keeping their snake for like 2 months that wants to tell you how wrong you are for the way you've done it for 2 decades.
They're always the experts.
Yeah,
I think
see that a lot.
we used a dimmer switch at some point on one of the early cages for their rainbow boa. I remember we had a dimmer switch.
I have one on my blue tongue skink right now.
Yeah,
heat lamp.
Yeah,
that's when I was a entry level professional reptile keeper.
That was when we were screwing up a lot of stuff, but that didn't burn the house down. So we did
not burn the house.
So we were good.
We didn't kill any snakes.
We did not kill any snakes with that.
I just Googled rheostat because I don't actually know what it is.
It's a dimmer switch.
Or what it looks like, for that matter. There's a really cool video on YouTube that shows you how to connect it and how to use it.
Yeah, I've used it before.
I don't ever do anything to do with carpentry or electricity or anything, because Bill was always so good at that. So there was no reason for me to ever learn that stuff, but he was really great at it. But one thing I should mention for people, well, whether they're just starting or whatever, even now that I've been keeping reptiles since the late 1960s, I occasionally get a new species, like I did on the blue-tongued skinks and the tricolor hogs in the last 10 years. And when I do get a new species, I I go at it very differently than the ones that I have kept for many years. Uh, a lot of times you can use relevant experience from other species and kind of make a good guess at what might work. But when I get a new species, like the blue tongues were probably the newest species I got about 5 or 6 years ago, I try to set them up exactly like the longtime experts have been doing it the first year or two. And the first time I breed them, I do a lot of weighing of babies and notes and records to see the progression of how fast they grow. And I keep closer feeding records, which I don't do with corn snakes and king snakes and things I've done forever. But on those first few years and the first few litters, I do basically like I did when I first started with corn snakes all over again. And after a couple years and a couple of litters of doing it, then I start to see where I might want to diverge from what the old hands are doing. And I think, I think this would work too because I did it with such and such. And then I'll give it a try. So I think no matter how long you've been doing something, when you start with a new species, it's good. I joined some blue tongue skink forums and I saw what other people were doing. So it's good no matter what experience you have to start over with a new thing as a beginner. And then after you have a little experience, then do some changes.
Humility is certainly a great trait in whatever hobby you do, because when you decide you can't learn anymore, you're probably the most dangerous person in that hobby.
And it becomes boring.
I was going to say, why do it if you're not learning?
Exactly. And that's one of the reasons I do occasionally get a new species because, we did have some blue tongue skinks back in the 90s and we had some tricolor hogs back in the 90s. But if it was mainly the employees taking care of them or if we weren't breeding them successfully, then I still consider it a new species when I start doing it myself.
I think that that's a big problem. The hobby, and it's not just the hobby, it's everything, but a lot of people like to talk in definites. And there's no, in the hobby, there's really no definites. There's tons of ways to do things. And we've talked about before, when it comes to pretty much anything in keeping reptiles, there's tons of ways to do things. And that's why you need to research. You need to listen to how other people have done things and don't just automatically assume that. And we talked about it before, when someone reads their very first care sheet or their very first breeder tells them how to do something, that's the only way they'll do it from then on. And then they'll tell everyone else who has a different way of doing it, they're wrong because the one way they were told is the only way they're gonna do it from that point on.
Exactly. And I tell people that book or that care sheet, that is a great place to start and get your experience. And once you do it the way the other people have done it, then it's time to see if there's some reason why you might want to try something else. Occasionally, somebody will tell me that they incubated their eggs or they kept their whatever this certain way that's different than I've ever done it before. But I tell them, well, this is the way I do it and I've been successful, but maybe in your climate or in your house, in your particular situation, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yep.
That's whenever I post things online or I have friends that'll message me, for example, one of my friends in Alabama recently got a corn snake for her classroom. This is the first time they've ever owned a reptile. She reached out to me long before they got it. And I was like, look, I'll be straight up with you. This is what works for us. It may not work for you, but I can tell you the way it works for us. And when I post online, I'll tell people, hey, I want to know how it works for you because there are enough people in this group that I'm going to get a variety of answers. And then I can kind of take everything that they give me and figure out what will work best for me. And I think if everybody had that open mind frame, that it might go a little smoother for some people.
How boring would the hobby be if there was only one way to do it?
Right.
Exactly. I always tell people, try to keep an open mind, just not so open that your brains fall out.
There you go. Absolutely.
So I have another question about how the hobby has changed. What did you think when you saw when ball pythons came and they were charging $30,000 for a ball python after you did corn snakes and colubrids for so long and you don't see $30,000 corn snakes for sale?
Even the newest corn snakes, I think probably the palmettos had the highest price of all, and I think they were what were they, 4,000 or something when they came out? Well, Mark Bell got one of the early morphs and he mortgaged his house to get it. But it paid off for him.
Yeah.
What I thought was, I guess I won't be buying any of those morphs anytime soon.
Hey, that's what I told him.
And it was true. All right, so we're getting towards the end. I do want to bring up a couple things from this week. Dave Kaufman's new video came out. He's been pushing it for a while. He had the new ball python movie. He went to Africa for a month and traveled through. Oh shoot! What three?
Yeah, you're the only one of the
I know
three
it
of us
was
that
in
watched it.
Benin,
Go to Ghana.
Ghana, and one of the other ones that's right there. That, anyways,
I saw an excerpt, but I didn't see more than that.
he was there for a month and traveled all three in. And it was a very interesting. He looked at the natural history of the ball python and where they're at, and he found. I mean, he was there during breeding season, so like he dug down to the ground and found nests. And he took temperatures at which they were incubating in the wild. He took humidity readings of which they were incubating in the wild, temperatures of the burrows, and it's very similar to what we're doing here. But there were some interesting takeaways I had from that movie. One was he went to what he referred to as a death market, which would definitely bother any of us. It was you go there and it's just a ton of dead animals that they sell for medicine and for other things. But and it made them, you can see visibly sick. And I thought about that. We go there and we go, that this is horrible. And he said in the video, it's not these people. These aren't horrible people. They've got to find a way to survive, and this is how they survive. But I thought it's got to be the same way when we think of like the radicals here, like PETA and all. If they look at a reptile expo and how do they put these animals in a delicate? Now again, we're not killing the animal, and it's a little different. But I thought along the same lines of it's got to be that kind of mentality of this is horrible. Now over there, unfortunately, it is leading to extinction of some stuff or like endangering some animals. But one thing that was interesting about ball pythons, we talked about wild caught animals, and the hobby used to import a lot of stuff. We import less ball pythons now, and normally a person would think that's great. We import less ball pythons now, but what they're finding is that it's actually worse for the wild population because that area has learned to catch a female, get her, bring her in, get the eggs, release the female back, and in the process kill no snakes. Well, if that monetary value leaves the snakes, the only other thing that snake is good for is food. And so they have found that the population has done really well because of importing. And so that was very interesting that, importing in this case is actually good, even though people will go, importing is horrible. It will lead to wiping out the population. But in reality, it's led to sustainable collecting of eggs and a sustainable population that is going downhill. And so that was interesting.
I think that can be very true in a lot of countries that have a lot of poverty, and the people have to feed their kids somehow. In Madagascar, this is mostly back in the 90s and the early 2000s, when Bill went and I went in the 90s. The people had started doing more export of the certain species, mostly lizards and a few snakes that were allowed to be exported. And what that meant was there wasn't as much reason to burn the forest so that they would have grass for their cattle if there was value in the animals that lived there. And I think that's probably true in a lot of areas that have reptiles or other animals, wildlife that have value that can be sustainable. Instead of people having a knee-jerk emotional reaction to whatever they're doing, I think they need to look at it from a biologist's viewpoint of, is it sustainable or is it not sustainable? And if we stop it, what will replace it?
Yeah, I think here in Western society, we tend to look at things. We don't start. If we're hungry, we can go down the road and go to McDonald's, right? We can go get a burger. If we're hungry, we can go to our kitchen. There's going to be a pantry full of whatever. For most of us, at least in America, it's going to be that way. But when you go to these countries in Africa, they'll go days without food. Oh no, we lost Kathy. Oh, there she is. They'll go.
A second.
They'll go days without food, or come close to starving to death. And so like these aren't evil people. They're just trying to find a way to survive. And if we can find a way for them to survive and still help on all sides, I think that's the best way to go. We can't think of them as they should live the way we live. That's the wrong way to do it. And that's kind of how it gets viewed when someone sees something like that market where all the dead animals are. How could they do that? Well, because that's how they're going to be able to eat tonight. That's how they could do that.
Exactly.
Some other interesting things he found while in that movie. So there was a study that came out, or an article that came out a year ago or whatever, that kind of ball python people that cling on to just one piece of information, those kind of people that go insane. There was an area where they found ball pythons climbing trees, and they're like, see, ball pythons are arboreal. And then people talking about, keeping them in racks because it's very similar to how they are when they're wedged down in the ground, and termite mounds, which is where he found all of these snakes, by the way, wedged down into holes in the ground, very small areas. And he asked the trappers or the reptile people that were helping him find these animals, do you ever find in these areas? Do you ever find these in trees? And they go, well, when it floods. That's the only time they ever tend to find them in trees is when it floods. And in the area where this study was done, which was not these three countries, it was a more forested area with a lot more trees and a lot more birds and all that. That's where they had found ball pythons up in trees, which made sense. It's a different area, but I forget what percentage. It was like 96% of ball pythons have been imported from these countries where Dave went to, and they are evolved the way these ball pythons have in these countries, and they live in holes in the ground. And he went there, he saw that, and he asked the people there, do you see this? And said, yes, we said this is what happens. And those are the people that are going to know, because that's their livelihood, to be able to go and find those animals. And then he took, I liked that he found the one on eggs and took the temperature and humidity readings, and it was exactly what we do in captivity. Well, that was in, I think, Benin, and then he went to Ghana and he did it, and they were much hotter. He actually did a temperature reading on the eggs there, and it was like 95 degrees inside the burrow.
Wow.
Because that area is much warmer than Benin. And the other was Togo. That was the other one, Togo. Yeah, Togo.
So Darren Watson also watched this video, and he asked if you saw the gas station that had gas in bottles.
That's how it was. So out in the middle of like in the remote parts of Africa where they were, it was like a Gatorade bottle and an empty glass bottle and empty Coke bottles lined up on a shelf, and that was how you bought gas. Wow. So like they'd fill those up at a gas station somewhere miles and miles away, and then that random gas station in the middle of nowhere was literally like an old 2-liter bottle of Coke full of gas.
We saw that in Madagascar too. One of the taxi drivers had a gas can like tank between his feet or under his feet where he was driving, and that's where he filled up the gas with an old Coke bottle.
Hey, yeah,
like an outboard engine.
What was also cool in that video, he went to a temple that like prays to the ball pythons. It was I think it was like Temple de Python, and they had tons of like the guys that like scarred their faces up to look like heat pits, and they treated the ball pythons like a deity almost, and like they prayed to them, which was a very interesting thing to see. These people like that loved them, and it was illegal in that area to kill one. If you killed a ball python, you went to prison.
Wow.
I was like, that's crazy too. It was like I said, it's a very good movie. It's a little, I think it's about an hour and 18 minutes. And even if you're not a ball python person, it's a very interesting video to watch how things are done over there, and that they're doing it differently than we are. When they incubate the eggs, it was funny. They're not incubating eggs in an old Coke refrigerator or in a brand new incubator. It was like a concrete room full of dirt, and they just dig a hole and shove the eggs in there, and then they hatch at some point because they're there. It's outside. The temperature is right, and then they have a great hatch percentage. And we're over here like, oh God, I got a speck of mold on my egg, and now it's going to die. And they're just throwing them into the ground there and waiting
letting them do their thing,
letting them do what they do.
And the variability on some of those babies, it's crazy to look at when they come out. Now, granted, as a non-ball python person, I look at a lot of them and go, that's just a ball python. But there were some that Dave had in there. I'm like, it's a very interesting. It's definitely different. And he actually imported several of them. So it was a great video. It's eye-opening to how that whole process over there is done. And that, again, importing is not evil if done properly. There's definitely a long history of it not being done properly in the reptile hobby.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a whole book about it.
I mean, Kathy was down there in Florida around some of those people. So like it's
That kind of information, though, is what we really needed. When I got my first few ball pythons, I got Tracy's book and read that cover to cover and learned a lot from that. Like I said, it was a new species, so I did it from the beginning.
yeah, and I'm a horrible person to say go out and buy, but I have a whole bookshelf full of books, and here's my two. Although I think I've actually read both of these corn snake books. But books are a great, like some of the books are a great place to go and get some of this information that you're not going to find. YouTube is not always the best place to go find information. I definitely think if anybody is into corn snakes, you should find Kathy Love's book on corn snakes. And it may be, I don't know what the last publication, mine here is 2005, but
yeah, that is the newest one.
Yeah.
The first one is out of print, but I think, and since the publisher sold it to another publisher, and we haven't been able to get copies since then, but I think you can still buy it on Amazon, the newest one.
Yeah, my first one, what's funny is the first one I got is from 2000, and then I got the new one from 2005, and it is like almost twice as thick in just 5 years.
And the reason that it is because when we did the first one, we put everything in it that we thought was relevant and that was known. And then by the time the second one came out, not only were there new morphs and things like that, but we had kept a list of questions that anybody asked us that were either confusing or not answered deeply enough or weren't addressed in the first book. And we addressed all of those in the second book.
Our dog is in love with Robert, and we have a gate on our door, and she's literally standing at the door looking at Robert and whining because she cannot get to him.
Because it's time for me to have.
I know, she's like, wait a minute, I have got no attention.
Yes,
he wasn't here last weekend either. So
my dad just showed me you can buy Kathy's book on Amazon for $16.99. I strongly suggest you do it.
Heck yeah.
Even if you're not a corn snake person, it is an awesome book. It's
maybe that sales pitch will make up for not having any of the reticks, Kathy.
If you come to the Tucson show this October, I'll be there and I'll sign it for you because I don't actually. I might have some used ones to sell that I pick up at used book places, but I don't have any new ones. But I'll always autograph any if that is something that you want to have done.
Yeah, the morph section might be out of date because that changes every 2 months. But the basic care and everything on corn snakes, it can't get better. Like it's an amazing book. And again, you can still learn more on stuff, but it is a great starting point. And if you're a corn snake person, it needs to be in your collection.
I had heard a number of years ago that Don Soderberg was working on an updated, like really big book, but I haven't heard anything about it for at least 5 or 8 years. So I don't know if he still is or not. But if he ever gets a really new big one, definitely buy it because I'm sure if he writes it, it'll be good. I don't intend to write another one because I don't keep up with everything now.
So that's another name in the hobby that people should know, especially when it comes to corn snakes and stuff. It was Don Soderberg.
Yeah, he's not only does a huge number of them and really high quality ones, but he also has a personality that everybody who's ever dealt with them always compliments. Because usually, back especially when I was doing a lot of selling and a lot of shows and such like that, people would always come to you and complain about the other person, your competitor, but nobody ever came and complained about John.
Yeah, I always found shows are definitely different now than they were before. They're very, I don't know. I know that at one point it was always like, I will sell my stuff for $5 less than the other person. And I think that's when prices have gotten a little more balanced. You don't tend to see that, or at least I haven't seen that kind of competition on prices and stuff. But and back in the day, there were so many more like bigger names. Like it's weird now that we're farther in the hobby. You would think you'd have a whole lot more bigger names. But I remember going to Daytona and like there were like 10 guys. Now, granted, yes, most of them were ball python guys, but they were like rock stars. Now there's like one dude. Like it's one dude and a bunch of it's all these other people that just like bought a collection and got into ball pythons last year. And now they have their first table at a show. And
so I know we're getting ready to wrap it up, but obviously it's been years since I've looked at that inscription that James wrote to me in this book when he gifted it to me in 2005. But he mentions in there that he's glad that he found someone he can share his passion with. And it goes, you do not, whatever. But it goes back to what you said earlier. You've got to find somebody that's willing to, even if it's not the same passion, you're willing to share it.
Exactly. That's the basis of a great relationship in my experience.
You hear that, babe? Basis for a great relationship. And I hauled you to 3 doctor's appointments today.
Yeah, so much fun.
Well, I want to, and again, I know James will wrap up here real shortly, but to your point where you said, talking about the rock stars, and that's what I remember from taking you guys to Daytona. And you'll excuse me, Kathy, but I walked away from that thinking these guys are kind of assholes.
Some of them were. So.
I walk out, and I'm leading to a compliment for you here. I'm incredibly impressed. Your humility. You don't seem like the lady who my son 12, 17 years ago was in awe of meeting. And that's impressive to me. And I thank you for that, for the guys and ladies like this that get to benefit from your expertise. But, this is one of those hobbies that I think that goes an incredible long way rather than some of the other stuff we've seen. And, so kind of big fish, little pond phenomenon, I guess. But again, I that's what I first took from the first 5 minutes of you being on here tonight, was that your humility is commendable.
Well, thank you. I always figured it doesn't hurt to be kind, and karma will come back to you.
Absolutely.
That's fine.
Well, several people found out that we were going to have you on, and they were very excited. And I thought it was very interesting because you're not, how do I say this? I don't want to sound wrong. You're not big in the hobby now, but your name is still there. Like it's been decades.
Not necessarily that you're not as big.
She's not on YouTube, and she's not having giant booths at the big shows, and she's not the one that everyone talks about. But you bring up her name, and reptile people know.
Oh yeah.
Oh no, they know Kathy Love.
Oh, he was pumped when you told him yes.
No.
He was pumped.
Like I said, between Kathy and Tracy Barker, those are 2 of the names that I think are in this hobby, and the 2 of the nicest people. I've met Tracy also, and she is one of the nicest people. I've said it before. She came by my table and told me my snakes were amazing, and it's
still fangirls over
and I
that
almost
one.
passed out.
Well, Warren Treacher told John that he had amazing looking.
Oh yeah, Warren. Yeah.
Sambo's this weekend, and he came over. He's like, "Did you see this?"
That's true. So like, it's those people like you that are willing to talk to people, and you realize that you're just a person that's breeding snakes. You're not you didn't cure cancer yesterday. You're just a person breeding snakes, but you're doing it the right way, and you have no problem talking to somebody about them. I think it's amazing, and I think that more people, especially at shows, could learn from that. You see a lot of people that if someone's not going to buy something, they're not going to talk to them. But to me, that's not a reptile person, because I'll gladly talk to anybody about snakes on my table, or snakes in general, or reptiles in general, even if you're not going to buy anything.
Oh yeah, I'll talk to anybody, and if they manage to get their snake in the door, I'll sex it for them. If that's what I'll show them how to do it. Whenever I can help, I always looked at it. If it's not going to cost me a lot in time and effort, and it can help somebody out, if you put out good vibes, you get back good vibes. So it's in your own best interest to do that.
And in the best interest of the hobby.
That too.
The hobby does not grow from people thinking they're bigger than the hobby.
Even not related to reptiles, whether it's just going down the road and letting somebody get in front of you if you can do it safely, just life in general, holding open the door for somebody, all those things. It's so little cost to you, and it just makes you feel better. It makes them feel better, and it's good for the world.
I agree.
I do that with my 3rd graders on a regular basis. Is it going to matter in 5 minutes? Then let's take a breath and move on.
All right.
Yep.
Love it.
So let's go ahead and wrap this up. Kathy, if anybody wants to get a hold of you and talk to you about corn snakes or any snakes or blue tongue, well, no, I'm not talking about blue tongue snakes. Don't talk to her about those. Hold those up for me.
Yeah, I would like them to talk to them about me because they grow really fast and they eat you at a Boston home.
So they want to get a hold of you. What's the best way to get a hold of you?
Well, my email probably. My business has always been called Cornutopia, not Cornucopia, but Cornutopia. So it's Kathy with a K at cornutopia.com.
I actually had to, when I was making the little thing to put on Facebook, I had to look up the business name because I've only, like, for the last, I don't know, 15 years, just like, it's Kathy Love. Then I was like, oh yeah, it is Cornutopia. I do remember that.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah,
been so,
and my website, I still have a website up there, but I don't keep it up myself, so I never get it updated very often because I do almost everything on Facebook these days. And you can always find me on Facebook too. And I belong to a lot of the corn snake forums on Facebook. So if somebody tags me on one of the ones that I'm a member of, I'll see it there. So it's pretty easy to get a hold of me online.
yeah. And if you see her message information on a Facebook group, just shut up and listen to it. Don't tell her she's wrong. All right, Robert, if people want to get a hold of you,
Website, Facebook, Instagram.
Nope. Don't do
what's the
it.
website?
Don't do it.
I'm going to change it to .net just so you can't sing it anymore.
.net. I can still do it.
Oh my gosh.
It's lsreptileracks.com. If you need a cage or a rack, get a hold of them, get it ordered. He can get it shipped to you or at a show nearby. You can pick it up there.
James, if you want to get a hold of us, how do they do it?
It is the Reptile Gumbo podcast on Instagram, Facebook, and at gmail.com. I forgot. Don't forget, we have a giveaway. Anybody still listening? I should have said at the beginning. We're still giving away a free membership to US ARC this month. We gave one last month. Thanks to Sean over at Herb's Reptile Shows. He's paying for the one this month. So all you got to do is go over to our Facebook group, and the post at the top of our page says who's been your favorite guest on our show, and it's 125 episodes. Choose one, and you're in the drawing for a free US ARC membership for a year.
And if you are already a member, we can tack that membership on to the end of yours.
Yes. Oh, and also, if you need a UVB bulb, check out VivTech for their LED UVB bulbs and use the product code GUMBO22 and you get 15% off of your UVB bulb, which I need to order soon.
Oh, yes, we do need those.
Yes. All right. I think that is it. Kathy, if you'll hang on just for a second as we go off, but thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much.
It's been amazing. Thanks, everybody, for listening. We will be back next week. Good night. Go ahead and exit.